Hey, what's going on YouTube, and welcome to another League of Legends Champion Guide. Today, we're going to cover top lane Jax, the Grandmaster at Arms.
Let's do this.
Jax is a very good duelist with an insanely strong late game. He's also easily one of the best split pushers in the entire game, and his hybrid damage makes him somewhat hard for tanks to itemize against. He's got a very strong gap closer that can also be used as an escape, and his AoE stun has the potential to be very devastating in teamfights. Jax, however, has a pretty mediocre early game, and until he has his Trinity Force and some points in his W, he's not going to be doing too much damage. He's also got a really long cooldown on his stun ability, and until he gets some CDR from his Trinity Force and other items, he's usually not going to be able to trade too often. He then also has no built-in sustain, and he will be focused in team fights because if you leave a Jax alone, it can destroy your entire team. For my Masteries, I like to go 18 Ferocity and 12 Resolve, grabbing Fervor of Battle as my Keystone Mastery. Now this keystone here is so strong on Jax that I wouldn't really recommend anything else at all. It works just incredible with your passive ability, and when you combine them together, it will add a lot of damage. For Jax's runes, I like to go for attack damage reds, armor yellows, scaling magic resist blues, and attack speed quints. The attack damage reds will just add a nice little chunk of damage onto your auto attacks and make your harassing and last hitting just a little bit better. The armor and the scaling magic resist will make you just a little bit tankier, and the attack speed works great with your passive and Fervor of Battle as it can get them stacking just a little bit quicker. As for your summoner spells, well, your first required one is of course going to be Flash. You are relatively weak in the early game, and this can save your life in all sorts of different situations. You can of course also use Flash offensively to finish off kills or close a really large gap when you combine it with your Leap Strike. For my second summoner spell, I always grab Teleport. Jax is easily one of the best split pushers in the entire game, and having Teleport will allow you to push for large portions of the game and still be able to make it to teamfights and objectives. Split pushing is really nice to have as an extra win condition, and therefore I absolutely always take Teleport on Jax. Jax's passive is Relentless Assault, and it can give you a ton of attack speed. This is a stacking attack speed buff that stacks up to 8 times. Every time you hit somebody with a basic attack or your W ability, you will get a stack of this passive, and of course since you're gaining attack speed as you do so, it gets faster and faster. Now unlike Fervor of Battle, these actually tick off one at a time. That means if you have to go a certain amount of time between attacking, you may still have some stacks on you as opposed to none at all. It's a really strong passive and allows Jax to be the hyper carry he is. Jax's Q ability is called Leap Strike, and it's great when used as an engage or an escape. When you activate this ability, Jax will dash to the target unit or ward. If the target is an enemy like in this scenario, you will deal extra damage. However, using it offensively like this to get on a target is only one way of using the ability. You can also use it to escape to a minion, monster, or ward. Since we're really low HP and running away from Nasus, drop it over the wall, and then Q to the ward to safety. Jax's W is called Empower, and it's one of his main ways of adding some extra damage in between his auto attacks. When you activate this ability, your next basic attack will deal some nice extra bonus magic damage. The best way to use this ability though is right after an auto attack, since it does reset your auto attack timer. Simply hit your target once, activate your W to cancel the animation, and hit them a second time. This is also great for stacking your passive just a little bit quicker. This will also empower your next Leap Strike, so if you do need to snipe somebody running away, you can also empower your Q and hit the target. Generally though, you want to save it to reset your auto attack timer to push out more damage. Jax's E ability is called Counter Strike, and it's great because it can be used offensively and defensively, just like your Q ability. Since this is an AoE stun, it's of course great when used offensively. You can either jump onto the enemy champion with your Q ability or walk up to them, activate your E, and when reactivated or when the duration ends, it will stun the target. It's a great way to hold your target in place so you can do your damage. This is also a fantastic defensive because when you are attacked by the enemy and it is activated, you will dodge attacks. The damage on the ability is also increased for every attack you dodge up to 100% bonus. Now your ultimate Grandmaster's Might, which is great because it does passively add more damage on your attacks, and it does have a great defensive utility as well. When you are attacking a target, every third basic attack within 2.5 seconds of each other will deal extra damage. With all the attack speed that you do build on Jax, you do get a third basic attack off pretty damn often, and it will deal a lot of extra damage over the duration of a game. Now this ability can also be activated, which makes it a great defensive. You'll gain a portion of your attack damage as armor and a portion of your ability power as magic resist. As you can see here, at first I was taking 54 damage from Nasus' autos, but in the end I started taking 43 when I did activate the ability. When you feel like you're going to take a big chunk of damage in a team fight, make sure you activate this so you reduce it by a significant amount. For your skill order, you'll first want to max your ultimate whenever you can at 6, 11, and 16. Then focus on maxing your W ability since it does do a nice extra chunk of damage and it can add a lot into an engagement. We then move on to maxing our Q since it does do a nice chunk of damage as well, but it's not as good as our W. You'll then want to save your E ability for last, but make sure you grab one early point at level 1 so you are able to stun the enemy champion. For your all-in combo, you'll first want to start by activating your counter strike and jumping onto the enemy with your leap strike. Activate your counter strike another time to instantly stun the enemy and follow up with an auto attack, and then use your empower to reset your auto attack timer and do some more damage. Here's what the combo will look like in full speed, and after the combo all you have to do is auto attack and use your abilities as they come off cooldown. In the lane phase, you'll want to focus on getting as much CS as you can. You're an incredibly strong late game carry, but you first have to make it there, and you're going to need your items to carry your team to victory. You won't be dealing a lot of damage early on without your Grandmaster's Might and your Trinity Force, so make sure you only trade when your counter strike is available, unless you're way ahead. If you are a good Jax, then you would have taken teleport, so try to coordinate teleport ganks with mid or bottom lane. It can sometimes take just one successful teleport gank to get the game snowballing. In team fights, there's multiple ways you can contribute, and it's going to depend on your team comp and the enemies. The first thing you can do is set your carries up for success and peel for them. You can usually shred tanks with your mixed damage, and with one well-placed counter-strike, you can often delete the enemy frontline very quickly with your other carries added in. If you have a dive comp, which is a highly mobile team that relies on getting on top of squishies, then go in with them and stun the enemies with your counter-strike to allow your team to shred through them. Basically, either sit on the front line and help your carries, or dive onto the back line. Of course, if your team is way behind, then avoid team fights as much as you can and split push. If you have teleport available, then you should be split pushing anyways and showing up with that teleport. Now we're going to look at a couple hard matchups, and first up we have Pantheon. The first reason, of course, is his Spear Shot, which will absolutely destroy Jax. This ability even goes through your counter strike, which is why he's one of your biggest counters. Aegis Protection is also pretty solid against Jax, but it's not as strong as it is against some champions because at least Jax does have an auto attack reset. Either way, this will stop some damage, which is annoying. You may want to consider getting a defensive first so you don't get destroyed. Next up is Garen, and he's pretty hard because of his judgment and his courage, but he could also even throw in his decisive strike. The reason I've listed Judgment and Courage though is because even if you do start casting your E ability, you will still outtrade Jax with these two abilities, which is pretty crazy. If he adds in his Decisive Strike beforehand, well, this gets even worse for you. Get as much farm as you can because you will outscale the absolute shit out of Garen, but you of course have to make it to the late game in the first place. Make sure you counter-strike his Q ability whenever you can. Poppy is also a pretty hard matchup for Jax, and it mostly comes from her W ability, which is called both Stubborn to a Fault and Steadfast Presence. Stubborn to a Fault is a great passive because it does give you some armor and magic resist, which itemizes really well against Jax since he is a hybrid carry. Steadfast Presence will then knock down anybody who does jump into her zone, so if Jax does use his Leap Strike into Poppy, she can activate this, knock him down, and follow up with damage. You'll have to try to bait out this ability as much as you can before you even think about Leap Striking. Fiora is the last one I'm going to cover, and it's because of her Riposte and Grand Challenge. Whenever Jax is trying to land a stun from his counter-strike, she can predict this and use her Riposte to stun him instead. If this happens, you're surely going to get your ass kicked, so make sure you bait out her Riposte before you go in for that stun. If you don't have your stun available, you're probably going to get your ass kicked by Grand Challenge. This is her ultimate and it will really increase her damage, so if you know she has it, you'll usually want to save your stun and dodge for this ability. With those covered, let's move on to our item build. In a normal matchup, you want to start with a Corrupting Potion and a Warding Totem, but if you are in a very easy lane, then you can get away with a Doran's Blade, Health Potion, and a Warding Totem instead. For your core build, you have the Trinity Force, Hextech Gunblade, and Sterak's Gauge. The Trinity Force will add a ton of damage since it does have some nice attack damage and attack speed, but of course it has the Sheen component as well, which works really well with your W ability. Hextech Gunblade will give you some nice damage as well and some sustain, and the Sterak's Gauge will give you a nice health pool, yet give you some attack damage at the same time. For core alternatives, you could get the Blade of the Ruined King instead of the Hextech Gunblade if you were against a very tanky lineup. Then if you were against a full MR team instead of the Sterak's Gauge, you could of course go for that Maw. For your boot options, you first have the Merc Treads if you're against a high AP/CC team, Ninja Tabis against a high AD team, or Boots of Swiftness for all-around mobility. For our item pool, we first have the Ginsus, which is a great item if you do need to hyper carry the game. This gives you absolutely everything you need in the attack speed, attack damage, and ability power, but it also gives you stacking attack speed, which works great with Fervor, and of course your passive. Wit's End is a pretty solid item as well if you're against a very high AP team, if you want some attack speed, and of course some magic resist. Titanic Hydra is an okay item as well, as it will increase your split push, but honestly it's not that necessary and I barely get it myself. For defensive options, of course Guardian Angel comes in at number 1. It'll be fantastic in the late game, and if you can come back to life and get off a stun, you can usually kill more people. Randuin's is also a really solid item since you will be jumping into the fight and you can slow people, but of course it also gives you armor and health, which is nice as well. For that exact same reason, Deadman's Plate, a great alternative as well, and it does give you some extra mobility, which is pretty solid. Lastly, if you did need some magic resist, you could get the Spirit Visage or the Banshee's Veil. I usually go for the Spirit Visage since you do have some healing in your build. But for our normal full Bruiser build, we take our core, get those Merc Treads, and get a Randuin's and a Guardian Angel. You'll be a pretty damn tanky champion, especially when you activate your ultimate, but you'll also do a ton of damage and be able to carry games at the same time. If, however, you needed to hyper carry games and you felt like that wasn't enough damage, instead of the Randuin's, you could go for that Ginsu's. I don't do it too often myself, but sometimes with the teams you get, you have to try to 1v5. But that, ladies and gentlemen, covers everything I've got for top lane Jax in Season 7. Don't forget to check out my social medias in the video description below, and for anybody that watches my guides on a regular basis, please let me know what you guys think of this new, kind of revamped guide. I'd really appreciate some feedback, so let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!